Presenting next will be Mr. Alec Gabin, working for this project in mixed media. This is The Door.
God, it's huge. I was struck by Bruce Conner's work. These two pieces in particular inspired me to encourage dirtiness, to work through to a point where things began to look old. It is as if Conner sped up time around the objects he used in his work. There is a sense that these things, bride and rat bastard, belong in the world. They hold themselves as products of a lengthy, unknown process. Regardless of whether or not Bruce Conner created them with an idea in mind, they undeniably have content. This is a door. For my final project, I decided I needed to make an art object from this door. It's wood, keyhole and locking mechanism, and other materials, wax, concrete, pastels, and whatever else was around. This is not a door. The door is gone. The word door lingers in the air, though the door itself has left us. I didn't think it would happen as quickly as it did. I was left with wood and a few pieces of metal. This is an altar. I built an altar out of a door. After reading only a small amount of Joseph Beuys' theory, I concluded that I was a shaman. I was praying through materials. To quote Joanne Mora, who is quoting Tessida Dean, quote, "There is nothing more frightening or satisfying than finding you've arrived somewhere without any clear idea of the route, having been faithful to the blindness with which you set out, and working by responding to external circumstances and to the unspoken desires and demands of the human psyche." End quote. Though this quote is referencing curatorial work, I believe it applies to my own as well. The problem is that when I built that altar and labeled it as such in my head, I stopped being faithful to the blindness that is inherent when working through medium. I began to consciously try to make an altar, to control things. The materials, the wood, the wax, and the concrete, the chunks of pastels and kids' washable paint, the broken pens and wax-soaked t-shirt, all of these things became stifled and stagnant. I had stopped listening to them, stopped letting the accident and the random come into play. This is an altar with a banana peel on it. This is an important step. The banana peel thrown at the altar in frustration toward the end of a 3-hour studio session informed me in an instant that I had stopped allowing chaos. I had become the worst type of shaman. Anal, uptight, controlling, a faker of faith. Twyla Tharp speaks to this way in which I trapped myself. Quote, "Planning lets you impose order on the chaotic process of making something new, but when it's taken too far, you get locked into a status quo, even from one you made yourself. There's an emotional lie to over-planning. It creates a security blanket." End quote. I was telling this lie when purposefully building the altar. The materials could no longer get a word in edgewise. Critique the next day revealed that I was right. So I broke the altar as previously I had broken the door. It happened even more quickly the second time around. This is not a door, and this is not an altar. Let's call it the clock. The clock does not look like a clock, as the door looked like a door, and the altar an altar. I deem the clock finished because I felt it had been thoroughly worked through. It looks like an accident, a result of materials being poked, prodded, and moved around. In retrospect, the idea of the altar was simply a way for me to keep working through the materials, which, though temporarily giving me direction, caused me to eventually become stuck. This played out in my first project as well, this cycle of stuckness and release, of intellectual planning and intuitive reaction of the brain and the gut. This work developed from my first project. This was an idea. Let's call it crinkle paper. Crinkle paper is wax stripped onto trash on wood. Its making was carried out as a planned effort with an image in mind of what the piece finally done would be like. These are several of the papers that lined the floor during my first project, while I dripped wax on a half-dozen different works, including crinkle paper. The distribution, color, placement, and texture of wax on them was completely random. The crayon drawings on them were done with no more than a half second's preconceived thought. They were done out of intuition, quickly, and from the gut. Both our guest lecturer, Hannaline Rogenberg, and myself found them more interesting than crinkle paper. In doing some research, I came across an article which dealt with the artist as an intelligent maker of accidents. Thomas C. Hild's 2000 article entitled Intelligence, Accident, and Artist Practice states, quote, "If a person's fallibility is a central feature of the human condition, then the embracing of accident, of the limits of control, and of indeterminacy as inevitable elements of human creative and productive activity is an intelligent approach," end quote. This article, which breaks down the nature of the accident in the work of an artist, inspired me further to let go of preconceived ideas and to realize the absurdity in trying to make my materials into something specific. I cannot help but ask, how much of this piece, Rauschenberg's 1955 interview, was made with a final product in mind? If I'm to correctly understand Rauschenberg's early methods of finding objects, I will note that even the way these things came into his life was random. He walked around his neighborhood and used what he found. This alone implies that Rauschenberg knew without a doubt that interesting things come out of random occurrence, a certain faith in the rhythm and cycling of the universe. What really baffles me about this piece in particular is that Rauschenberg managed to keep his door intact while working through it. I can't help but see this as kind of magical. Having looked to both Connor and Rauschenberg's work for evidence of true working through of medium, work which seems to arrive at content rather than contriving or imposing it, I'll ask you to humor me as I return to analyze my own cycle and attempt at this process. Both the clock and the notebook paper drawings are on the other side of contrived idea and purposeful making. They came into being by working through, by accident and over time. To me, judgments of quality and beauty aside, they are the subconscious, the dream. They are the remainder, bad poetry in the back of my head. It seems my cycle, my own pattern, is to make something contrived, then break it or use the scraps from its creation to find something more interesting. As Hannah Arendt says in The Human Condition, quote, "This is mortality, to move along a rectilinear line in a universe where everything, if it moves at all, moves in a cyclical order," end quote. My own ways of moving about and moving through are not excluded from the universal cyclical nature of things. In recognizing the nature of my own cycles, I have come to realize that I don't have to force something to be interesting. I have realized that content is something to be arrived at, not to be injected into work. I am as skeptical now in 2013 as Clement Greenberg was in 1940 as to whether or not ideas are even necessary to making content-filled works of art. Ideas may even hinder things if the goal is simply to let medium speak. And for the record, I am not a shaman.
Confronting and working through the mediums he chooses, as well as those that choose him and that he encounters, Alec's work shows a process. Instead of a beginning and an end, there's a series of points along the way where he takes stock and launches from again. He seems driven to explore his intuition through his process of making work, which can at times leave him alternating between gut instinct and his intellectual side. With the abstract expressionist school of painters he looks to, he is driven and curious, and I admire his